A horrible and evil crime has taken place on board a cruise ship involving a cruise ship employee or a crew member assaulting not one but two women within an hour of each other. Since then, he has pled guilty and been arrested. At one point in time, he was facing life in federal prison. However, since he pled guilty, that sentence has been significantly reduced. I would say a little too reduced in my personal opinion. I do have a clip that I want to show all of you that we were all on the same page and that nothing is taken out of context. I'm also going to look at this from the perspective of not only a former crew member, but as a passenger that is very socially active on board cruise ships as well. That way we all understand the intricacies of the fraternization of the passenger and the crew member. By the way, a little disclaimer, this is a very sensitive topic, so if you are, let's say, emotional when it comes to topics like this, or parents, if you have any kiddos in the room, now might be the time to tell them to skedaddle.
A former bartender on the Margaritaville cruise ship out of the port of Palm Beach has pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting a passenger. Hubesh Duki was facing much more serious charges, but they were dropped in exchange for his concession to a lesser charge. The victim and her roommate say Duki had served them drinks throughout the night. When the victim woke up, she was naked in her room with him standing over her. He apparently held onto their room key and waited for the women to fall asleep. He's facing 2 years in prison. The victim is also suing the parent company of the cruise line for emotional damages.
So there is obviously a lot to unpack here. However, for this specific video, we are going to look at this from more so a broad perspective. That way I can get to the potential lessons to be learned here, because believe it or not, whether you are a passenger or crew, there is always something to learn and things to talk about. Now, if you do want to dive a little bit more into this story, there are plenty of articles on it from the Washington Post, Cruise Radio. I will link a couple of them in the comment section below. I'll pin them and you can check them out. This man's name is Hubesh Duki, kind of fitting for the last name if you ask me. This situation took place on board the Margaritaville at Sea cruise ship out of West Palm Beach. I've been on that ship several times and it is an older ship. I believe this is important to note based off of what happened. So there were two women that were sailing on Margaritaville at Sea Paradise back in May of 2022, and they decided to get some drinks with a bartender. Unbeknownst to them, allegedly, apparently, well, he's owned up to this now, so it is confirmed, he took one of their room keys, hid it in his pocket, and waited until the evening hours where the two girls were asleep. He snuck into their room and at one point was caressing one of the girls' faces, and then he switched over to the other passenger where he assaulted her in the worst way possible, to the point to where, according to her, she ended up conceiving a child, getting pregnant, and having to get rid of the child, in which she suffered mental stress and damages. Once Duki got arrested, naturally the FBI got involved. From there, not only did he admit to some of his crimes, like going into the room, he said it was consensual allegedly. The FBI looked at his phone to find photos of the naked girls in their cabin, thus confirming some of the crimes that may or may not have taken place. Up until November, while the trial was going on, he was looking at potentially life in prison, but since November in one of the trials, because there are multiple, he ended up getting a 2-year prison sentence, which personally for me I think is a little low. It does look like at this point there are going to be multiple trials going on. Like in this case, there was one of the passengers that say she got pregnant by him because she said she is married, but her and her husband were not active in the adult way at that point in time. But there is also one of the passengers that is looking to get some money from Margaritaville as well, about $75,000. To this point, Margaritaville has not made any comment on this topic either. First of all, looking at the damages that the victim is asking for, the $75,000, it is unfortunate when something like this happens, which is very, very rare, by the way, when it comes to a crew member doing something on a cruise ship. Very rare, almost never happens. I want to make that very clear. It is unfortunate because the cruise line, like Margaritaville in this case, is going to be seen in the public eye as, in a way, at fault, when there isn't really a way to determine, even if you do a background check, if somebody, like a crew member, is capable of such a heinous, evil crime. Secondly, looking at this in the perspective of a crew member, this may not be something well known in today's time, but believe it or not, it's not just a rumor. Guests and crew members do fraternize, they hook up, they bed wrestle. However, it's more of a secret. Back in the golden eras of cruising, let's say 80s, 90s, and maybe some of early 2000s, it was well known that these things would happen. A bartender or a room steward and a guest would get it on. It'd be a thing. Now, people are a little more quiet about it because, of course, it is very known as far as the cruise lines and their policies that if a crew member fraternizes with a guest, then they are going to be fired, terminated, no questions asked. Now, there is a way for crew members to be allowed to do this. They do have to get authorization not only for their manager, but also either the first officer as well as the captain. They got to sign paperwork to know who you were visiting, what cabin you were visiting. It has to be done like in a lot of cruise lines at least 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes a month in advance. It's a very interesting and intricate process, also that they can avoid situations such as this, like a lawsuit. Now, to be clear here, let's not take away from what's happened in this particular case. It is indeed a crime. However, there are other situations in which there are crew members that fraternize with guests, and there are times where at that point in time, whether they're meeting at the bar or outside of one of their cabins, everything seems consensual. However, one of the crew members may make some type of pushy move that the guest doesn't like, or there have even been some cases where guests know that if they let this go down, nobody's really going to know what happens except for the passenger and the crew member that's inside the room. They can make some allegation saying X, Y, and Z happens to the cruise line and potentially get a lot of money. That does happen. Peeling back the curtain for you passengers out there, believe it or not, just being honest with all of you, there are some crew members with certain departments that talk about these very topics, hanging out, fraternizing, and doing some bed wrestling with the guest. It just depends on how they go about it. Do keep in mind that as a former crew member and somebody that's on ships a lot, I have a lot of friends that are on cruise ships that I hang out with all the time, whether you're from Carnival, Virgin Voyages, Holland American Princess. We all communicate a lot and we talk about these very things. There are just different ways that a lot of crew members go about it. For example, let's say somebody in the room steward department, because the department does play a factor on how sneaky you actually have to be. In the room steward department, let's say a guest and a crew member want to hang out. They could potentially do it in the room, or a lot of times you'll see across all departments, if somebody likes somebody, they'll wait until they're off in the port, and let's say the ship has like an overnight, you're on a Virgin cruise or whatever, and you're over in Greece, then they'll get an Airbnb, hang out, do their thing. No harm, no foul. However, last time I was on a cruise over in Europe, there was a cruise line, I'm not going to mention their name, Mafia Shipping Company. There was some officers that were hanging out in the nightclub, and they were actively looking for women to hook up with while we were over in Italy. My girlfriend and I and some other friends that we were on the cruise with, we were hanging out, taking photos. They got mad at all of us for taking photos and saying, hey, if you're going to take photos, you got to do it outside of the nightclub. At first, I thought it was a little weird and strange, but I realized they didn't want any photos, any documentation of people having pictures of them fraternizing and hanging out with other guests as they left to go with them back to their cabin. Looking at this from the perspective of a passenger, if you are a seasoned cruiser, or maybe you've taken a couple cruises yourself, you or maybe one of your friends has some story about some fling or crush that they had on one of the crew members. Maybe you got their contact and maybe you guys keep in touch till this day, or maybe you saw each other when that crew member was finished with their contract. Who knows? However, we know that this thing does happen. Just last week when I was on the Carnival Jubilee, I'm not going to name their names, but there were a couple of nice girls I met. Their parents were subscribers, and we all ended up hanging out in the nightclub in a lot of areas, and one of which had a huge crush on a bartender. They connected through WhatsApp, and well, you know what happened. They found a way. Whether you are a passenger or a crew member, the reality is that we are still humans. I think most of us are. Some of you are maybe aliens. I don't care. I'm not here to judge. But you are going to be attracted to other humans, whether it's a passenger or a crew member. Maybe some of you passengers like somebody in uniform. It is what it is, and it happens. However, one thing that you have to understand about the crew side of things is that for crew members, while they're working on the ship, the mentality is very different. And for all you, let's say, beautiful young ladies out there and young men out there that are trying to have a little bit of fun while you're on your cruise, you have to state your intentions very, very clearly, because there could be a situation where there's a girl that is, let's say, wanting a bartender or any of the crew, a entertainer or whatever. He comes back to the room assuming that something's going to go down and you don't really like the advances, and just like that, something happens that was never meant to happen. And in that case, obviously that man is a monster. He should pay for what's gone on, but it could be vice versa for the guy as well. I've seen situations on multiple occasions where this stuff happens. Again, not taking away from what's happened in this particular case, but all I'm saying is that if you are a guest and you are talking to a crew member, you have to be very careful about your intentions and what it is that you want, because they are on a completely different mentality more than likely than you are. Once again, I'm just explaining the small intricacies between passenger and crew fraternization. However, when it comes to this horrific story, this man deserves more than 2 years. I hope he actually gets more than 2 years, but time will tell. Anyway, that's what I got for this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit that like button on your way out. Subscribe if you haven't already. And as usual, I love and appreciate every single one of you. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.